In 1776, Adam Smith published The Wealth of Nations, introducing the invisible hand, the idea that individual self-interest, guided by market competition, could serve the common good without central coordination. But what would Smith make of Donald Trump, a president who combined free market rhetoric with heavy protectionism, who promised to make America great through tariffs and trade wars, who treated international commerce as zero-sum battle? Today, we'll explore how Adam Smith would diagnose what Trump represented. His reaction might surprise you. He would see Trump not as capitalism's champion, but as its corruption. To understand why Smith would be horrified by Trump's economic policies, you need to understand what Smith fought against: mercantilism. Mercantilism held that nations grew wealthy by accumulating gold, protecting domestic industries, and winning zero-sum competitions against rivals. Mercantilists saw international trade as economic warfare. Your gain was my loss. Trump's rhetoric was pure mercantilism. China is raping our country. We're losing on trade with everybody. He imposed tariffs on steel, aluminum, and hundreds of billions in Chinese goods. He treated every trade relationship as a battle where America needed maximum advantage. Smith spent The Wealth of Nations dismantling this error. In Smith's view, trade isn't zero-sum. Both parties benefit when they exchange goods according to comparative advantages. Trump's tariffs cost American consumers billions in higher prices while creating relatively few manufacturing jobs. Yet Trump maintained strong support among working-class voters. This reveals something crucial. Economic policy isn't just about material outcomes. It's about psychology and identity. When factories close, workers don't just lose income, they lose dignity and community. Trump's tariffs may have been economically inefficient, but they were psychologically powerful. Smith himself would understand this. In The Theory of Moral Sentiments, he wrote about how humans aren't purely rational calculators. We're driven by sympathy, our capacity to imagine ourselves in others' situations, and by our need for recognition. This creates a dilemma Smith didn't fully anticipate. What happens when policies that make people feel protected actually make them worse off? How do you maintain support for beneficial trade when its costs are concentrated and visible while its benefits are diffuse and invisible? Smith worried deeply about the corrupting influence of great wealth. In The Theory of Moral Sentiments, he wrote about the disposition to admire the rich and great. Society's tendency to assume wealth reflects virtue or merit. Trump represents an extreme version of this dynamic. A man whose primary qualification for presidency was claimed business success. Yet his actual record was mixed at best. Multiple bankruptcies, failed ventures, allegations of fraud. His supporters admired him not despite his wealth and self-aggrandizement, but because of it. Smith would recognize this as catastrophic moral error, confusing material success with virtue, wealth accumulation with public wisdom. Trump didn't just bring a business mindset to politics. He actively used his political position to benefit his business interests. This moral breakdown didn't happen in a vacuum. It emerged from decades of rising inequality, of seeing wealthy elites escape consequences, of watching the system reward those at the top while leaving ordinary people behind. Trump's supporters often expressed cynical realism. At least he's our corrupt strongman. Smith would see this cynicism as more dangerous than economic inefficiency. It represents the death of social trust, the foundation on which both markets and democracy depend. Smith's great insight was that beneficial social outcomes can emerge from uncoordinated individual actions. The invisible hand produces order without a central controller. Trump represented the opposite, the belief that America needed a strong leader who could impose his will on complex systems. "I alone can fix it," Trump declared. This runs completely counter to Smith's worldview. For Smith, complex modern society's problems cannot be solved by any single leader. They require distributed intelligence and institutional processes. Trump's strongman approach consistently failed when confronted with economic reality. He promised to bring back coal jobs, but market forces toward cheaper natural gas and renewables were more powerful than presidential will. He made a show of pressuring Carrier, but the company automated positions anyway. You cannot command complex economic systems the way you command a business. But Smith believed the invisible hand worked within proper institutional frameworks, rule of law, property rights protection, contract enforcement. Trump's approach combined strongman intervention in some areas with chaotic deregulation in others. He imposed tariffs while cutting financial regulations. He attacked Amazon while giving massive corporate tax cuts. Smith himself recognized the need for public education, infrastructure, and regulation to prevent merchants from conspiring against public interest. What Smith advocated was rules-based markets, commerce operating within democratically determined frameworks that promote competition, prevent exploitation, and serve the common good. Trump violated this vision in both directions, imposing arbitrary political interference while dismantling necessary regulations protecting workers, consumers, and the environment. Trump's rise reveals how concentrated wealth can capture democratic institutions. He used inherited wealth to build a business empire, leveraged that into celebrity status, converted celebrity into political power, then used political power to further enrich himself and his allies. Smith would see this as capitalism's self-destruction. When wealth becomes so concentrated it can purchase political outcomes, markets cease to serve the common good. The cruel irony, Trump gained support by positioning himself as an opponent of elite power, even though he exemplified the concentration he claimed to fight. He railed against the swamp, global corporations, tech companies. Yet his actual policies, massive tax cuts for the wealthy, deregulation, billionaire appointments, served concentrated capital. Smith would recognize this as sophisticated moral corruption, using legitimate grievances to serve illegitimate ends. Trump identified real problems: wage stagnation, manufacturing decline, political unresponsiveness, but offered false solutions that redirected anger toward scapegoats while protecting the underlying structures creating inequality. But we must acknowledge, the grievances were real. Global capitalism has created enormous aggregate wealth while leaving many communities behind. Democratic institutions have often failed to address these dislocations effectively. Smith would confront a troubling question. If markets within democratic institutions have produced such extreme inequality that people turn to authoritarian strongmen, was his framework flawed? His answer might be that we've lost the moral and institutional foundations he saw as essential: sympathy for others, justice, and democratic governance that can manage markets' disruptive effects. What would Smith say we should do? How do we address legitimate problems without falling into authoritarian solutions? Smith would start with moral reconstruction, rebuilding social foundations that make both markets and democracy possible. First, address extreme inequality. Smith would recognize that extreme inequality is incompatible with democratic capitalism. This might require progressive taxation, stronger labor protections, and policies giving workers genuine stake in prosperity. Second, rethink globalization. Modern globalization may have outgrown our capacity to manage it democratically. We might need new international governance forms that maintain trade's benefits while giving local communities more voice. Third, create alternative institutions. We need alternatives to both unregulated capitalism and authoritarian control: cooperatives, social enterprises, stakeholder governance, demonstrating that other forms of economic organization are possible. Fourth, rebuild civic capacity. We need education teaching citizenship, institutions enabling genuine democratic participation, and cultural spaces where people can practice collective self-governance. Fifth, democratize technology. We may need to treat certain forms of concentrated technological power as public utilities requiring democratic oversight. None of these solutions is simple. They all involve difficult trade-offs between efficiency and equity, innovation and stability, individual freedom and collective welfare. Trump revealed that the invisible hand cannot operate without visible hands supporting it. The hands of citizens committed to justice, democratic institutions that channel self-interest toward public benefit, and cultural values that make cooperation possible. Smith never imagined his invisible hand working in a moral vacuum. He always assumed it would be guided by moral sentiments, our natural capacity for sympathy and justice. But if market competition undermines these moral foundations, we need visible democratic intervention. The invisible hand was Smith's most famous metaphor, but his most important insight was simpler. We are social creatures who depend on each other. Our self-interest is always embedded in networks of mutual dependence and moral obligation. Trump represented the fantasy that a strongman could solve our problems through force of will. Smith reminds us that real solutions require something harder. Building institutions and cultures where millions of individual actions, guided by both self-interest and moral concern, can produce outcomes serving human dignity and collective flourishing. The invisible hand needs visible hands to guide it, and those hands must be ours, all of ours, working together.